Here's something that nobody talks about. 95% of companies that try to use AI fail, not because the technology is bad, because they do it all wrong. They buy the tool, they run a little test, they call it a pilot, and then nothing changes. Months go by, the tool just sits there, they're stuck. Geoff Gibbins has a name for this. He calls it pilot purgatory. When your company is trapped in endless test runs that never become real results. Geoff spent 15 years helping giant companies like Walmart, Vanguard, and Nestle grow. Then he watched AI show up and saw the same disaster play out over and over again. So he built something new, a company called Human Machines, to fix that exact problem. Most leaders don't even know that they have. His superpower, he can look at your team, your workflow, and your AI tools and tell you exactly why they're not working together. Then he builds a plan to make them click. Today, we're going to get into all of that, the tools he embedded, the mindset that leaders need, and why the future belongs to teams, not just technology. Geoff, welcome to the show.
Good to see you, Geoff. Great to be here.
Geoff, you studied human sciences at Oxford, biology and society at the same time, like a scientist who also thinks like a sociologist. What made you pick that path when everyone else was choosing something more traditional?
Yeah, great question. I think actually growing up in the UK, most universities, you have to pick what you're going to study when you're like 16 or 17, like very early. You have to do all physics or all English or all math, whatever it might be. And I guess I like the idea of something where you can actually understand something from different angles, whether that is, like the sort of the social sciences, statistics, all of the different aspects of understanding human. And I guess I wanted a program that would help me to understand things from different angles. And that was actually really fun. And I think helped to set me up for the type of work I've done in my career, where I've never been just a numbers guy or just a tech guy or just a human side guy. I've tried to look at complex problems from different angles. And you could say that's the thread throughout my career.
Interesting. I actually started out with psychology and then taking a lot of psychology classes. We started taking some sociology classes, and I just connected a lot more to the sociology side. It was like a whole new evolution that I never considered. And now I have a conversation oftentimes with people and they're telling me, this is why the mind works the way that it does. And I said, great. How does that actually play out in society? That's what I'm more interested in discussing.
Yeah.
But yeah, so interesting. I also noticed that you love to cook, right? And make cocktails. So both of those things require precision and creativity at the same time. What do you like to make?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So actually for me, I think one of the things I like cooking is that it doesn't require precision. So baking is a point of difference I'm terrible at, right? Because that actually requires precision of getting the ratios right and the measurements. What I enjoy about cooking, and so I love to cook things that will take hours and hours to make, and the house smells really nice and require lots of steps, and it's really about trying things out and experimenting and seeing this work, this not. That's what I really enjoy about it. And so I guess the kind of hands-on application and let's try and experiment is something that I've always liked about that. And just taking on and learning new skills and new types of dishes, I think I've always liked, and like little projects. So that's what I've always enjoyed. And I think in the world of work, like that plays out in terms of if there's something I want to try out or learn about, I figure out how do I actually apply that? What's a thing I can do to test that out rather than just read about it? I'm interested in getting my hands dirty, figuring it out.
You spent almost 15 years at a top innovation firm helping massive companies like Walmart and Nestle grow. Then in July 2025, you walked away and you started from scratch. What did you see that made you say the old way of doing this is broken?
So I think over the last decade or two, I'd seen a lot of technological changes, the sort of Web 2.0 era and social and metaverse and Web 3 and all the things we've been through. And I think over the last 3 years, I started doing a lot of work at a lot of people, starting looking at generative AI and how does that work in the workplace and in customer experiences, and started to realize that two things were happening. One is that the same issue of looking at the technology as the solution and just bolting technology onto how we already work was playing out. And I think you see that doesn't really work out. That when you just apply a technology to how work is done today without rethinking what you should be doing and what could that work look like in a new way, I think you miss a lot of opportunities. And so I saw a lot of that with the emergence of generative AI, is that people would, and I myself was guilty of that too in some of the work that I did. You would look at what's the work and how do I stitch automation into some of those tasks, and then figure out how then you can do the same thing even faster. So that was one thing I discovered. And then the other thing was really that generative AI is not like cloud or metaverse or Web3, because it's actually not a regular technology. It's not deterministic. It's weird. And it's this whole new species of intelligence that humans are having to figure out how to work with in real time. And so I equate this a little bit to thinking about the analogy of a dolphin, right? So I know that, I don't really know much about dolphins, to be clear, but I know that dolphins are super smart, but they're smart in ways that are different to humans. They are much better at certain forms of communication. They are highly skilled in cognition, but they're different to humans. And so I think you need to think about AI a little bit along those lines. It's incredibly capable, intelligent in ways that are different to humans. And so what's really important is to understand, how do you actually best collaborate with this new form of intelligence that can do all sorts of things that humans can't, but also has fundamental differences in the way that human minds work too. And so what I got really interested in was, how do you actually work with people to figure out how can they work best with this new form of intelligence? How can you measure that? And how can you actually help them improve the way that they collaborate with AI as a result?
That aligns really well to the show, and some of the purpose behind the show is bringing some education to the audience around what's out there, what tools are available, and how to use them. A lot of people, I think, are more and more are getting familiar with the LLMs, the ChatGPTs, Geminis of the world, with the agentic future that's coming, and just in general, how to be effective with using those tools. I know that which we can move into, the CoreX tool that you built sounds like that's something that definitely can be helpful, again, more from a training perspective and alignment perspective, both to individuals and also to an organization. Yeah, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the CoreX tool, what it is, and the purpose behind it.
Yeah, sure. So really, I guess the idea behind CoreX is that a lot of knowledge work over the next few years is going to really consist of people working with either one tool or multiple different AI tools in their workflows. I think eventually that will evolve to teams of individuals interacting with lots of different AI tools all at once. But right now, often it's like an individual working with an AI tool or multiple tools. And what happens, I think, in companies is that there is a rollout. So let's say of Copilot, for example, which is often common, or ChatGPT Enterprise, hundreds, tens, or thousands of people will be given access to a tool. There's usually some kind of training offered, which might be some like online instructions. There may be some prompt training. Often it's quite compliance focused in terms of, okay, don't upload this, or don't say that, or watch out for this. Make sure that you don't just copy a hallucination into a customer document, things like that. But I think generally people don't actually pay attention to that stuff. I think everyone's so busy and overwhelmed with all sorts of sources of information all the time anyway. And there's not a lot of instruction on how do you actually get the most value out of this interaction. So what kind of things could you be doing with this? How can you be best building your skills with it? How can you be best understanding how you're actually working with it? And so the goal of CoreX is to figure out, how do you actually measure and help people improve how they work with AI tools. So that can start with, once people actually have access to an AI tool, there's two different types of assessments that they can do. One is an assessment of how you actually are able to solve a problem. So in a live chat assessment, you can chat with CoreX to figure out, how do you solve that problem that you identify, and then it goes through a conversation with you over about 20, 30 minutes to figure out how to solve that problem. And during that time, it's actually probing you, it's helping you to figure out how to solve the problem, and it's also measuring how you're actually interacting with it too. And at the end of that, you can get a report that shows, here's what you did well, here's what you could do better at, and it looks at things like, are you actually pushing back enough? Are you able to work in different modes with the AI where you're providing suggestions and also responding to its suggestions? Are you really understanding what it's saying to you before you're keeping moving? So like an analysis of that. And then the other type of assessment.
Does it have actual domain knowledge of your industry or your company? Does it build that over the course of time? Or are we talking about more in the moment problems not related or detailed to either the role or organization that you're in?
Yeah, great question. So it tries to de-bias the whole situation by you picking the problem and you describing it to the AI. So let's say I've always been trying to get AI to write really good newsletters for my company, but it never really does a good job. You could define that as a problem. And then it would actually it runs on Claude, and it would actually have Claude use its training data to help advise on that. But it would rely really on you to provide the context of the problem, and that it actually assesses how well do you give it context. So not just how well are you actually solving the problem, but how much context are you giving the AI? Are you actually providing good constraints? And what it does is it analyzes how much better the conversation went than if AI had just had the conversation with itself. So it actually analyzes the value of the human judgment that you're providing. So I ran a study over the last few months with about 500 people actually running this analysis. And what it found was that just under 20% of people didn't actually add any significant value beyond what the AI could have done itself. So if the AI had just had the conversation with itself and it played out, that would have been about the same for about 20% of people. About 80% of people actually added value through extra context they provided, through pushing back, through providing constraints, through actually saying, what if we do this instead of that? And it identifies for an individual as well as for a team, what are the ways in which you're actually adding value and where are the missed opportunities where you could have gotten to a better outcome if you'd worked with it differently. And so as a result of that, you can get a kind of a turn-by-turn analysis of the conversation. And so that has applications in training as well as actually in hiring assessments. So like an AI proficiency assessment. If you're looking to hire people, how could you figure out if this is somebody who was very well skilled in working with a chatbot, given that a lot of knowledge work in the next few years is really all around that. The other thing that CoreX can do is actually analyze your past conversations. So I can show you an example of that from my own. So what you can actually do is there's a prompt that it provides to you to actually analyze all of your past conversations with your AI tool of choice that you've been using. It asks the AI to actually analyze those conversations along 15 different metrics, and then gives you an output analysis, and then benchmarks you against that database of several hundred people to help you figure out where you're doing well, where you could improve. And so I can show you an example of this. Is actually my assessment I ran just the other week. So what CoreX did was it asked Claude, which is the main AI that I use, to give me an assessment of how my conversations over the last few months have gone. And then it benchmarks me against a database of other people who've run the same assessment and a couple of different studies that I've run. Overall, it gives me a score of 84, which is pretty good. So this puts me in the top 25% of people who've been tested. So I guess it's good that I'm doing pretty well, hopefully. But then what it gives me is a more detailed analysis. So it looks at 3 overall things. So one is this concept of results. So did I actually get to a really good result as a result of working with the AI? Was it better than a human could have done alone or an AI could have done alone? And then it gives me a score for that, and there's a breakdown I can take you through. The second piece it looks at is the relationship. So what's the quality of the dialogue that actually was used to get there? So did I push back enough? Did I provide enough context? So you can see I haven't been doing so well on that one. I got a 73 for that one. So I'm above average, but not so good. And then the last one it gives me is around resilience. So this is really interesting for how you evolve over time. And I'll show you more details about this. So this looks at, am I actually learning from what AI is telling me? Is it actually showing signs that my skills are developing rather than atrophying? Am I actually building skills over time? Am I improving in these metrics over time over the course of analyzing these conversations over a few months? And so I'm doing a little bit better there as well. I guess I'm above average. But then what it does is it identifies me as that into one of four types of collaborators. So it generally looks for, as an individual, are you somebody who provides a lot of context to the AI, and then actually do you provide a lot of critical engagement? So I get this partner assessment, which shows that I'm been in the right area, in that I do provide a lot of context and I provide enough of the kind of critical evaluation of it. But then everyone's got more things to work on. And some of the recommended actions for me, for example, are, it shows that I'm very good at working with AI to get to a good outcome, but I need to do more work of actually starting from scratch working with AI. So actually, rather than getting AI to work with a first draft and then improving it, how do I start with a first draft myself? And you'll notice actually in the feedback, it shows that I have also received this feedback in the past and have not acted on it. So it actually digs in and gives me a bit of analysis. So then there's a lot more detail that goes into. So it shows what percentage of the time am I spending in different types of modes of working with AI, whether I'm guiding with oversight or using it as an advisor and asking questions of it about me. It looks at sort of different types of tasks that I'm doing, and then it identifies strengths and growth opportunities for me. It then looks at how am I doing over time. So actually the amount of value add that I'm providing to AI in the judgment of what I'm adding is actually improving over time, over the last few months. Whether or not I'm actually applying a lot of context, that's stable, so it's not really changed. And so there's a lot of things that it will give me an analysis around how I'm actually doing. Glad to see that nothing is actually declining. It's either improving or stable over time. And then it gives me a detailed score breakdown. And so from this, I would be able to figure out if I was actually going to apply the changes that it's recommending, which one of the things it points out is that I'm not doing that. I would actually be able to figure out how can I work with AI better to get better results, to continue building my skills over time. And so as an individual, I can use that. And it's a good little co-pilot coach for me. And then I'm also building a Chrome extension and a desktop app that will then give me in-the-moment advice as I'm working with AI on how to improve that. So it, for example, if it knows that I need to work on first drafts, it might actually say, hey, Geoff, how about this time we don't do that? How about this time you provide the first draft? And it actually gives me in-the-moment coaching as well as individual prompt advice, where I can get advice on an individual prompt or a conversation that I might be interacting with. So I'm working on that. And then at the team and individual and organizational level, how do you actually scale that so that if you're doing a hiring effort, how could you identify people that have the right skills for the job? 2, if you're about to start a training program, how do you actually identify what's people's baseline and how do you personalize the training program for them? And then 3, how do you actually provide on-the-job coaching for people as they're working with AI, rather than just giving them a license and saying, go figure it out?
I'm sold, Geoff. I want to start running potential hires through that assessment. What are the skills that people are going to need in the future for the future of work? What I always mention is critical thinking. And so what your tool does is it helps measure that, how you're considering the way to prompt, how you're navigating certain situations, how you're likely dealing with, or whether or not you're identifying hallucinations, right?
Yes, error spotting,
Yeah. Super critical. And yeah, from my experience, both working in and supporting a wide range of enterprise companies and being involved in a number of software rollouts, both as a user and somebody that was managing the implementation of those, I agree that companies generally don't do a good enough job of training in people on how to leverage these tools. And I think AI is the same way. But usually maybe an SME within the organization is identified to be the person who was the captain of that office or branch or team and cascades that information. They also have a job that they do at the same time.
Sure.
Yeah, I can see the utility of a tool like this, and I appreciate you sharing that. I definitely want to take a look at that on my own as well and demo that out.
Yeah, and I think what you pointed to is just that I think the world of training is a tough world right now, because I think people are so busy, so overscheduled, and so overstimulated in a lot of channels and communication efforts. It's hard to really get through to people in their work. And so I think as much as possible, it's helpful to be able to analyze actual backwards work that you've already done and give people low lift ways of getting that information and that insight, as well as that's really specific to them. And then also helping them to have in the moment on the job coaching rather than having to rely on a discrete training session, which I think a lot of people, they might not attend, or they might attend but just be multitasking in the background too.
So you talk about the learning flywheel, which basically means that humans teach the AI. Then the AI gets sharper. That sharpness makes humans better. And it just keeps spinning. For a regular team member who's not a tech person, what does being on that flywheel actually feel like week to week?
Yeah, so I think one thing that's really important to understand about working with AI is that it's a journey. It might not feel that great to start with, and there will be bumps along the way, but the goal would be that over time you feel like the AI is getting better at understanding you, and you feel like you're becoming a better person and a better human, a better worker as a result of working with it. And so how that could look like in the simplest way, if you're without any sort of complex tools or new workflows, is that over time you could work with an AI tool to perform some different tasks, and then you can actually you can provide it feedback and you can see the difference in how it's getting better. You can say, okay, I see this error. Can you make sure you don't do that again? Can you make sure you remember that? But then also you can actually ask it for feedback on you. So you can actually say, okay, you can see some of the patterns in my work now. We've been working together for a few weeks on these different things. What can you spot that I'm doing that I can improve upon? And so that could be, look at the last 3 pieces of writing that you've reviewed for me. What are some of my blind spots? What are some of the biases that I might have? How do you think I could give you better first drafts in the first place? Things like that. So it looks like that you're getting feedback and you're able to build your skills. And so the AI could help you to figure out what those things are, but then actually be a bit of a coach too in getting better at that. So let's say it identified that you could do a better job of figuring out the risks in a plan, not just figuring out what the solution is. You could actually get it to help you figure out, how do I have a systematic way of identifying risks in a plan first? And how could I take a crack at that myself first and give me a new mental model for understanding risks that I didn't have before?
That's a really good point in terms of what the future looks like. Even my interaction with AI tools right now, I learn new things. Especially if I'm building business plans or strategies or different ideas, it starts bringing new things that sometimes I have to Google or look up or get more reference points on to understand, but it's building my knowledge base. And I think as these tools progress and as the future of work progresses, that I really see people wearing multiple hats instead of being very siloed and specific. The need to wear multiple hats and understand how a lot of these pieces of the puzzle work together is critical. I always talk about being an architect, and I look at it the same way. It's like understanding how, the different aspects all are put together. And just even as an individual employee, I think those are skills that always set you apart if you can connect the dots and understand how the organization works. Because we know it, right? Everybody, especially in cross-functional organizations, you're reliant on your peers or partners. You don't have the autonomy to make a lot of decisions. So at least if you can understand where they're coming from, where their interests lie, what their motivations are, which is similar, I think, in a way to what we're talking about here.
Totally. I think in a lot of ways, AI can help you to become a better systems thinker, to actually understand the systems and understand different perspectives around you. And I think there's actually evidence of this too. I think there was a study done about a year and a half ago at Procter & Gamble, and they found actually that by working with AI, the R&D teams were able to think more like marketers, and the marketers were able to think more like R&D experts, right? So it actually helps you to think beyond your individual function, your individual role, and your individual expertise, to see other perspectives and see how the whole system fits together. And so I think that ability to help you become a better systems thinker is really important as a way of understanding how you can get the best work out of AI as well.
Something else AI gives you the ability to do is you can go in, learn and understand new domains, new cross-functional team responsibility. You can learn new things, basically, that you maybe didn't have exposure to before. But what I like the idea of is maybe in the past you were limited to to the scope that you're a marketer learning marketing stuff. But now that you can bring your marketing exposure over to the engineering team and actually bring skills from one domain over to another in a way that they've never been able to before. So I think that's really exciting. I think the opportunity for solopreneurs and people to build businesses or small organizations to do things probably unheard of before is the wave of the future. That's exciting.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. Yeah, I think it can amplify, if you have a particular area of expertise, you can amplify your ability to execute things in that area of expertise with skills that you didn't have before.
Right. One other thing that resonated to me, and this aligns to the CoreX tool and maybe some of the assessment tools that you have, but as a manager, managing people, you have your one-on-ones, and a lot of that is trying to understand how this individual's thinking, what bottlenecks they have, what challenges, not only in the projects that they're supporting, but maybe what their skill set is, if there's any gaps or lack of skills. So this type of tool is a level up to get actual true feedback on, hey, this is where this individual needs some additional training or support. You would hope to get the feedback from your employee in the past, but that doesn't always translate as well. They're not always going to be as transparent. Maybe they don't even know where their gaps are. So yeah, I could see this tool being a huge level up for managers as well.
Yeah, I hope so, yeah.
You say 95% of AI pilots fail, and the real reason is that companies put AI on top of broken processes instead of rethinking how they work. Can you give us a plain example of what mistakes look like in real life and how a team gets out of it?
Yeah, sure. I think I've been guilty of that myself, right, in the work that I've done with clients. So I think it's easy to think we know how something is done, and how do we find ways to automate that to make it faster, better, cheaper than it is already. And I think that's all well and good, and that can be beneficial, but I think there's a real missed opportunity to reinvent what you could do instead. So let me give you an example. So one of the projects I worked on over the last couple of years, I did a lot of work with a company, it's a retailer in the fashion space. And so looking at the design and production of garments and apparel for the US market. And one of the things we looked at was, how do you understand how clothes are designed and made today? And so right now you could say that the role of a designer is to like peer into a crystal ball and look about a year out, because it will take on average about a year at this retailer to go from an idea to something on a shelf, right? And so they have to be predicting for spring and summer 2027 or whatever it might be, what will people want, and starting that design process a year ahead of the time. So that's pretty hard, and it's a long journey of about a year working with suppliers, working with merchandisers to figure out how do all the steps to get to market. And so actually, I think this was one of the more successful efforts, really, was looking at how do we map that out, and then let's map out all the tasks involved, all the people involved, all the complexities. But instead of adding automation to those existing tasks, let's figure out what are the actual outcomes that we're looking for. So one of the outcomes would be that something is on trend. Another outcome would be that there is a cohesive look across the line that lines up with the brand. Another outcome would be that it meets the margin requirements for XYZ supplier or whatever it might be. And so from there, you identify how do we actually redesign the path of designing a piece of clothing using humans in the right stage and using agents and tools in the right stages to do that. And so we actually worked on building a tool, but also a redesign process whereby it would identify from things on TikTok and runway data what were actually the trends in the market. It would then generate dozens of different mood boards and inspiration for design. Then there would be a creative director agent that would figure out which of these things that we know are on trend are right for this brand. Then there would be an agent that would actually design clothes, an assortment agent that would figure out how do we have a line that's 20 items rather than 30 items. All of the pieces of the puzzle were figured out in different orders actually than they were done today or in the past, and then actually a redesigned process that was also much faster and more efficient. And so in implementing that, we actually managed to dramatically reduce the time to market to really just a few weeks or months, depending on the type of garment, but also introduce that feedback loop that we talked about. So feedback loop from the market, even before you've produced clothing, because you can actually produce a design and get feedback on it earlier in the process and launch it as coming soon on e-commerce. But then also actually getting feedback from suppliers early and feedback on costs and production costs before you committed to that design. And so through that process, we're able to actually involve the real people who did that work to redesign the process, redesign their jobs, and actually iteratively build and implement a tool that did that. And so now they're shipping clothes much faster time to market, and there's a real tool that is behind all of this that initially started out as a prototype, but now actually stitches together lots of different types of automation with human roles at different stages.
Were there some pretty heavy bumps along the road with that and learning, or was it the design really strong and then the implementation aligned really well? Can you just give us a little behind the scenes on that?
Yeah, I think definitely some bumps along the way. I would say when you're redesigning a whole process and workflow, you have to figure out who are the right people to actually sponsor that. It sounds like organizational politics, but it's really important. And that was one of the earliest things we had to figure out. After about 7 or 8 weeks, we had a great plan of what the new workflow should look like. We had a working prototype that people loved. But the big question became, if we're actually going to implement this, we would need to totally redesign all these different functions.
Right.
And do we think it's worth it? And who's actually going to be responsible for driving that change through the organization? Because if it had just stayed with the design team, it wouldn't have worked. If it had just stayed with the merchants, it wouldn't have worked. And so what we actually had to work towards was how would we identify the right case for doing this, and then get all of the organization aligned around how to redesign the workflows and who was actually going to run point on making sure it was successful. And then the other piece of it too was, if this is going to be how we work, it's not just a tool. We want to build this ourselves. We want this to be a proprietary technology. How do we patent it? How do we protect it? And how do we actually hire and build a team that's going to be responsible for running this? So rather than just assuming this would be possible with some kind of SaaS tool that would be acquired, how do we actually build this as a proprietary capability? So a lot of that groundwork had to be figured out in the early months of that program in order to make the actual build and implementation successful. And that's human work, right? That's actually understanding the organization. That's actually figuring out what will it take to redesign the way that we work, and what will need to be in place for people to feel confident that they should even pilot this on one of their brands.
Folks get comfortable with the way they do business and their job and their role and how it is today. So rethinking the way that you do things as an organization can be a painful and scary process, I would say, for a lot of organizations. I know everybody's essentially confronted with the same challenge right now. Is it time to make a switch and completely rethink what it is that we do, or should we wait on the sidelines? What's your suggestion to organizations that are in the process of considering which way they should go?
Yeah, I don't think there's one answer. I think what is important for organizations to figure out is what's the portfolio of efforts that you need, right? So some of the things that you should do are about how can we just implement some quick fixes that are going to make our world a little bit easier, a little bit more efficient in what we do. And that doesn't need like big slide deck presentations of what to do. It's just, let's start experimenting with these things and implementing some changes that seem obvious that we should just go ahead and do, but also communicating those in a way that make people feel confident that this is being done in a thoughtful way. On the other side of that, though, you want to look at how would we actually reorient our work, not through the current tasks that we do, but through the outcomes we want to achieve, and how could we achieve those outcomes better using these new technologies, right? So in the case of the fashion business, how would we dramatically increase time to market, speed up time to market? How would we dramatically improve our ability to be on trend? How would we dramatically improve our ability to have cohesion visually across a line when we're buying from lots of different suppliers? So how do you look at different ways to achieve those same outcomes in a better way, and then identifying which of those things are worth investing in and where do you want to just be at par, right? And so I think that's part of the work to do, is figure out as an organization, where do we really want to invest in reinventing ourselves, and where do we want to be relying on external parties, external tools, and just best practices to improve incrementally in what we're doing.
If you were able to pick one tool path that you think would align to most organizations, would you say they would benefit most likely from just implementing an LLM tool if they don't have that, such as a ChatGPT or Copilot or Gemini? Or do you think they really should start looking towards agentic tools or N8N types of tools? What's going to be best suited for companies in the future?
Yeah, so I think for most companies, probably all companies, I think that having some kind of, in the next 3 to 5 years, having an implementation of some kind of chatbot that interacts between one person and a tool, whether that's from Google or OpenAI or Anthropic, I think is something that probably a lot of companies will need to implement and should implement, right? In the same way that everyone uses Google, right? It's no longer a question of, should a business use Google? Like, obviously, like, people are going to use Google to do their work. It's there. You might as well figure out how do you make effective use of it. I think the question, though, becomes, how do you give people the right support in order to get the most out of that? So how do you actually help them understand what they could be doing with it, right? Rather than just using it as a search bar or an email improver, like, how can you give them some advice and guidance on ways in which they can experiment and identify ways to improve their work? So I think that's probably going to be a big part of the next few years. And I think over time, Google and ChatGPT and Claude are going to be stitching in a lot of functionality which now exist in these agentic tools. And so over time, it will just get better and better at doing all of the more complex work. And I think that over time, the goal, I think, for a Claude or for a ChatGPT in the enterprise is to make those kind of agentic solutions really simple and easy to use so that everyone can use them. And so I think companies can rely on that and say, this is going to be a good path for us. I think the other area, though, is actually how can you identify ways in which you can have a safe kind of sandbox for experimentation. So if there are people who really want to redesign the way they're doing something that would benefit lots of other people in the organization beyond just themselves, how do you give them the right kind of safe tool set, whether that's N8N or some kind of internal vibe coding platform that will help them to be able to build tools, implement solutions, and then at a safe level get some feedback on them so you can see, should we create a team around these? Should these be things that we should scale up across the enterprise? And then the third level is, where are there areas where you need to just build a dedicated team to figure it out already, where you know there's a big pain point or a big area where you want to develop a new capability. How do you stand up a team with them and then give them the brief to figure out what's the right tooling that they will need, what's the data that they will need, and how do they actually develop the right way to redesign some workflows and implement them in a safe way so that you can figure out how they work and build from there. So the example I gave of working with the fashion retailer, that was what they did. Is they really created a new team that could start in one area of their business around clothing and figure out, how do we completely redesign everything we do, and then figure out how that can work beyond clothing afterwards.
As a baseline, an LLM tool will be a must-have for any and all organizations, and then they'll build structured tools around specific processes or teams depending upon the need. That's not accurate.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And I think
your vision.
over the next few years, those LLM tools will evolve, right? I think they will become more easily integrated into all of the existing software and tools that we have. So you see this already with Copilot being more integrated into PowerPoint and email and everything. So I don't know over time that it will be like a separate tool you have to go to. It'll just be integrated into all the tools you use. And then I think the other thing is I think it will become more team-based, right? So it won't be just like me and my chatbot, but actually individuals interacting with AI in more interactive ways, right? If you think about a lot of people right now, they will spend a lot of time in video calls in a meeting, and there's like an AI transcriber tool, or maybe 2 or 3 of those running in every meeting that you're in, and it's assumed that will happen now. I think in a lot of meetings, I think you could see a future in a year or two in which that AI transcriber is actually not just listening, but also saying something. So if you and I are having a conversation, we're saying, yeah, I feel like we should do some research on this topic. The AI transcriber can listen and say, you know what, actually, we did a study on that 2 weeks ago elsewhere in the organization. Here's the results, and here's what you should know, right? And so it's actually playing an active role in day-to-day conversations. And so you're feeling like AI is part of the team rather than a chatbot that you happen to consult when you want to. It's just an integrated part of how you work.
Which aligns to the conversation that people are having about leveraging AI agents as different employees in the organization.
Yeah, totally.
Right.
Yeah, I think it'll become a more integrated part of the team. Yeah.
Yeah. We talk about being an architect and not just a worker in the future. And in looking at what's happening right now, what's your vision of what the future of work looks like in the next 3 to 5? And I love to ask the 10-year question too, as well.
Okay. So I think that over the next 3 to 5 years, and maybe I'll build a little bit on what I said and then add a couple of other things. So I think we will see that AI will become more part of the team. And so I think it will be thought of less as a chatbot that I choose to consult, and more as a different form of intelligence that's working around me. So it's part of conversations that I'm in with other humans, and it could, for example, interject and say, have you thought of this? So it's providing me feedback. It's also something that is increasingly something I'm going to be reviewed by, right? So it's not just me thinking about how do I review what AI says, it's going to be reviewing me and providing me with feedback and helping me to get better at what I'm best at. And so I think in that world, what's really important as a human is think about what should I be best at? And how do I actually identify what's the unique vantage point? What are my unique skills that AI doesn't have and that other people don't have, that then I can use AI to actually amplify and be even better at? So a little bit of personal reflection around, well, yeah, what am I really good at? How can AI help to take me to the next level of that? I think is really important. I think if we go to the 10-year view, I think it becomes a little bit more physical world relevant. So a lot of what we talked about is chatbots, and it's really about knowledge work, right? It's words, it's pictures, it's maybe voice chat that we're talking about. I think what we'll start to see is that more of this will evolve into the physical realm. And in the same way we're talking about chatbots, we'll be talking about intelligent robotics. And so that's relevant it's already relevant for a lot of people in more manual skilled work in warehouses. And I think we're going to start to see that shifting into more knowledge work, right? And also the environments we go into. So in a grocery store, in any kind of built environment, there will be more robotics that we're interacting with and that are interacting with us too.
Yeah. I've seen some cool new innovations with robots and that are being built. And when we think of robots, I think oftentimes the audience or even myself, I think of the actual humanistic type of robot. But within manufacturing, right here, we're in the Bay Area here, even the company Numi, which is a Toyota manufacturing facility, they've been using robots, sophisticated robots to help build cars for
decades
20
now,
plus years.
It's a daily part of those workers' lives, and I think we're going to start seeing becoming more of, if I went into a restaurant, into a cafe, there might be like some kind of robotics, which might not look like a humanoid robot, but it might be baking cakes in the background. I don't know, it might be serving me, it might be doing whatever it is that is the work that's done in a cafe or a restaurant that might be partially done by robots too.
Have you seen these kiosks that they just make coffee? It's a robot inside. You walk up, you swipe your card, and it push a button, and it makes a latte for you.
I
you
have
seen
not,
any
but
of
I would
those?
like one of those at home, actually. That would be really nice.
Geoff, thanks again. Where can people go to follow you and find out more about your work?
Great. It's been a real pleasure. So people can find more about my work at my website, which is human-machines.com, or on LinkedIn. It's Geoff Gibbins, the silly Geoff spelling with a G, unlike yours with a J. And yeah, look forward to hearing from folks.
Everything we talked about is in the show notes as well. And thanks for helping the audience stay unlocked. Don't be a stranger.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, it was fun.